Good morning, everybody. If this is the first time you've joined us, this is Fernaz Parker with the Daily Box. And I have with me two of our young reporters. We've got Ponso Pilane and we have Raisa Patha. They're from Joburg and Cape Town, respectively. This is a first for us. We're just trying something new to see if we can chat about some of the big stories that happened this week. And one of the things, I mean, there was a lot of big stuff this week. The collapse of the Scoan Church, that was a big one, the Scottish referendum, not so much in South Africa. Shenanigans at Parliament. But for us at the Daily Box, and maybe it's a little bit skewed because we are predominantly women, one of the issues that just really irked us was the resurgence of the big butt. It's back with a vengeance. On Monday morning, you couldn't escape it. Every single paper was talking about Nomvula Mokonyane's bottom. And we didn't take too kindly to that. Ponso, you wrote a reporter's notebook, or what we call a reporter's notebook is an opinion piece, basically, speaking about your issues with this, the way that the story was reported. Can you just talk us through that? What did you think?
Okay, so I'm on social media as usual, and they're like a gazillion headlines about Nomvula Mokonyane defending Jacob Zuma with her butt. It's absurd to even read that. And so you read on and you find out that she said something in Sotho that was directly translated. And anybody who is South African or knows languages to a certain degree knows that direct translations are not always accurate. So to find leading newspapers and news organizations running headlines like Nomvula Mokonyane says she's going to defend Jacob Zuma with her butt is problematic. It's ignorant, it's disrespectful to Nomvula Mokonyane as a woman and as a minister also. It's not just any woman. She holds a very high position in the leadership of our country. And it's also disrespectful to the people that belong to this culture and this language. But it was her butt. That was the butt of the joke. So that was problematic for me.
The butt of the joke. I mean, there were a lot of people also commenting about this. It's surprising to me that this story, it took on wings. There was a SAPA story that was reprinted in several newspapers, and then it was on radio and it was on TV. It was almost like if you repeat a lie enough times, eventually it becomes the truth. How did you feel about that? Because you're a Sotho speaker yourself, so obviously when you were listening to it, you had a different reaction. When I heard it, I thought, well, that's odd. But for you, who understood exactly what she meant, how did you feel about that?
I was annoyed and I felt patronized and as if I was dumb. Like a lot of people, and Sianda wrote this in MNG Voice, and she's like, there's about 3 million people that speak Sotho in South Africa, and let alone to think that it's not just for Sotho people, Tswana people as well will relate to this. So there's a majority, or a large number of South Africans that will actually understand this. And for it to be ignored and to run with the story that is very baseless, that is senseless, to say the least, was undermining the intelligence of South Africans as a whole. And it was also just undermining women, because women's bodies are being policed on every single newspaper, almost every day, on just media in general, or even in the streets as we walk past. So it was just annoying on so many different levels. From a gender perspective, it was annoying because it's a black woman's body, and from just a black person's perspective as well, it was annoying because you're undermining the complexity of my language.
So, I mean, you mentioned Sianda. This is Sianda Mohutsiwa. She wrote a piece on ZANews and on Thought Leader as well, and she said, I want very much, as you can see, for this to be a matter of ignorance, and not what I fear to be a matter of pure disrespect. To refuse to investigate the meaning and context of this quote is to refuse to consider that a language that has lived longer than South Africa can have the sophistication required for the phrase "fight with my buttocks" to make sense. So, yeah, I think that echoes what you're saying a lot, Ponso, about how it speaks to race, it speaks to gender, it speaks to language, and just not going further. I saw a piece in the Daily Maverick. Zanti Pai said, generally the media did not translate Minister Mokonyane directly because they were too careless or lazy to investigate the meaning of her words. It was simply easier to place her words into the existing narrative. It was easier to play into an existing rhetoric of the most outrageous intellectual deficit amongst the particular group. And I think also Mokonyane, a lot of people don't like her. So
Yes,
when
yes.
she said something like this, it plays into that narrative of, oh, she's this ridiculous woman and you can't take her seriously. But actually, I think there was a failure on the part of journalists. You said in your opinion piece that, you could have just asked someone who speaks the language, what does that mean?
No, yes, I think it was not even an ignorant thing. It was, for me, in my own opinion, it was a deliberate uh, call on most of those journalists because they knew, and I said it in the opinion piece as well, Nomvula Mokanyane has had scandals. We know what she said in Beggar's Style that probably cost her becoming the premier of Gauteng this year again. So it was just playing into that narrative of her being careless and also playing into the narrative that she's a Zuma loyalist. So it just worked and it was easy and it would sell papers and it was clickbait and to compromise journalistic integrity and the craft of journalism for clicks and for hits on your site. For me, as somebody who's aspiring to be a journalist full time, it's disappointing.
Raisa, you watched this. What did you make of it?
I agree completely with what Poncho is saying. I don't speak the language. So for me, reading that article, it would be very easy to believe people when they say that it was just about the buttocks, and that absurd statement. But then you had these other opinion pieces like Poncho's, which clarified. But if there hadn't been that movement, you would completely take in this narrative that, this is what she was saying, that she isn't in saying something intelligent, that you can make a fool out of her, make a fool out of the language, and make a fool out of women. So it was very important to have the backlash because journalists definitely failed in that regard.
So, I mean, we've had several butt-related articles on our site this week. The most recent one has to do with Vogue. I know Vogue is not a South African magazine, but it does have a ripple effect over here. Do you think that these two issues are related, Raisa? Just maybe just tell some of our viewers who don't know what happened with Vogue, what happened with Vogue.
Basically, Vogue published this article where they said that it is officially the era of the big butt. And there was a huge outcry. In the article, they mentioned a couple of artists, such as Nicki Minaj, Beyonce, Rihanna, and they also mentioned celebs like Iggy Azalea, Rose McGowan, and they were talking about these celebrities who they kind of think epitomize the big butt. And they went on to talk about twerking and all these issues, and it just created a storm because big butts have existed since the dawn of time, and you can't make it an era about big butts. And there was a huge backlash on Twitter, and people were just saying, how can Vogue do this? And they were talking about beauty standards and fashion industry and saying that really the black body has become fetishized. It's become a spectacle. Still, after all this time, we're still talking about the black body as if it's in fashion, as if it's in vogue, which completely, it kind of says that maybe later the black body will be out of fashion. And that's not correct at all. You can't make these kind of statements about a body. It's racist, and there's also a gender bias towards the white body. So it was a really, it really created a storm on social media.
Outside of social media, though, did it create a storm? Did young women that you know also speak about this, Ponso or Raisa?
Well, a couple of my friends, I showed them the article, and initially they were saying, why are you talking about Vogue? How is Vogue relevant in South Africa? And I kind of said to them, well, Vogue magazine is telling people what to think about the black body, first of all. And even though Vogue might not be as widely read in South Africa, it does speak to certain niche groups in South Africa who kind of uphold these white beauty standards that the black body is something to ostracize. And that's important. It's important to, question what people are saying about the black body, about bodies in general. And it's important to hold them to account for those kinds of statements.
Ponso, do you have any thoughts on this issue?
No, yes, and I think when people ask why Vogue doesn't matter, so why should we care? It's really not actually about Vogue. In this instance, it happens to be Vogue that brought up the issue. But this speaks to a bigger issue where certain things are not acceptable until they have a white stamp on them. So they speak to, and in my opinion piece about this, I talked about Columbusing, which is things being appropriated by white people, and then as if the originators never existed. And it stems from Columbus discovering America, or the New World, so to say. So it's, yes, discovering, because there were people there. You don't discover things when other people are already there. So it's the same thing with the big butt Vogue issue. You can't say you're officially discovered or in an era of big butts when a whole continent of people have existed having big butts for the longest time ever. So were these people invalid before? In your eyes, were these people invalid before you wrote that piece? And I think the journalist, I think her surname is Garcia, like it was very reckless of her to actually even want to write that piece. But it speaks to the bigger picture of how Black women's bodies are moderated in society and what people think about them, especially non-white people, non-Black people. What are people thinking in their heads? Because I feel like if that article was ran by Vogue magazine, they thought it was okay. The editor edited that and thought it was okay. It went onto the website and it's still there and they think it's okay. And that is what the problem is, and not necessarily that we care about Vogue, but we care about the image that, or the perspective that Vogue is bringing up with this art.
Sort of a blinkered perspective, like they didn't stop and critically look at what they were saying, that now it's the era of the big butt. What does that mean? In 6 months or 2 years, is it not going to be the era of the big butt anymore? So what happens to people who have those bodies? Very disturbing. But I mean, we among us have had, this is not the first time we've been speaking about butts at the Daily Box. I looked at it last night, and I think we've had like 7 stories about big butts. They just keep coming back again and again. In fact, when we first started, one of the stories that was big in the news was about a service delivery protest in Diplo.
Yes.
Who were burying their butts. And if you guys recall, that was a huge story, not because it was a service delivery issue. We have service delivery protests in South Africa every day. I believe at an average of 3 a day. But that day, because people were showing their butts, pictures of these butts were on lampposts everywhere, they were on newspapers everywhere, and everyone was having a big chat and a big laugh about it. What is it about butts? Are we fixated? Are we fetishizing it? Any thoughts, Raisa?
I don't know what the issue is. Like, I mean, I don't understand why people make such a big deal out of butts. I don't understand why butts are something to make a spectacle out of, to make a conversation around, because we all have butts. And really, there's no need to kind of make it something that needs to be fetishized, that needs to be created a performance around. In the case of the Vogue piece, I mean, that was really one of the biggest issues. In my piece, I spoke about how, it linked back to this idea of Sarah Bartman and, the human zoo. And really, it just goes to show that in some ways, nothing has really changed in the way that people look at the Black body. And even in the issue with the protests, it's amazing that that image could completely wipe out the serious issue of service delivery, which was the real issue. That wouldn't have happened if people had had proper services. And this was the only form of protest that they had. This was like driven out of desperation. But instead it became about the butt, and it became a joke and something to mock, it's absurd really that this still happens.
At the same time, that story probably wouldn't have been read as widely if it were not for that butt.
True.
So, in a sense, it kind of worked in that community's favor. It's difficult, because we so easily ignore protests in South Africa. So on the one hand, they got the coverage they wanted. On the other hand, it wasn't the coverage that they wanted. People weren't engaging with their issues and their problems. It was just like, ooh, butts,
Yeah.
It's sort of a lose-lose situation, really.
It definitely is, and it's kind of sad that it wasn't just people who were saying these things. It was being spurred on by the media, this kind of talk about the butts. When really, I mean, if journalists had actually brought the real issues to the fore and not made it about the butts, we could have been having a very different conversation.
I agree with you. Also, we've had that wasn't the only butt story that we had. Diploof, we had the woman who was hugging the Mandela statue in Sandton City. On the one hand, why is there a naked woman hugging a Mandela statue in Sandton City? On the other hand, the comments that came out after that were all about her butt.
Yeah, and her body.
And the body.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's really problematic, and because, and just going back to the Diepkloof strike and everything after the woman showed her butt was not about the strike. It was about the fact that she showed her butt, and then the conversation took a turn, and it's not about the people who've been fighting service delivery. It's about a black woman's butt or a black woman's body, and the same thing happened with the Nelson Mandela statue and the woman. It's strange that a woman will strip naked in public and hug a statue, but it wasn't about the act of stripping down and hugging the statue. It was about her body. It became about her body. We do not know if this woman is okay or she's mentally all right or what's happening in her life. But we are now focusing on her body. No, she doesn't have the right body. I think in Race's piece, because she wrote about it, she was like, it's about body politics now. What is the right body? So are you saying that there are certain bodies that shouldn't exist? Are you saying that means you are actually canceling a whole people's humanity and saying, listen, you happen to exist and you happen to breathe and live and everything, but you know what? Because you're not in the right packaging, you should not be here. What does that say? What does that say to women? What does that say to young girls? What does that say about how people, this all goes back to how people see the black woman's body. Is it really a body? Is it a body on its own, or is it actually a person? And a lot of the times in these situations we've seen, it's about body and not the person.
I agree with you. Very recently we had that issue at UP where those two res students dressed up in blackface and padded their behinds. Once again, the butt issue. I think it was Tio Molefe who spoke about that, and he called it a performed stereotype of the black body, I believe. It's just surprising. And maybe it shouldn't be, because it's September and already we've basically had a butt story for every month of the year at this point, even though the large majority of South Africans are black and half of those people are women. So we keep coming back to this issue of the female body. We should just get over it at this point. I'm concerned that as reporters, we all are reporters, we need to look past the butt.
I think what's important is that, Tio Molefe, he said it was an anti-black stereotype. And just the words anti-black stereotype, I think that's very significant. Because if people could understand and realize and become conscious of the fact that what they are doing is an anti-black stereotype, then at least, there'd be some recognition and awareness for what is going on. And I mean, again, that issue of the tax goals and the blackface and the big butts, I mean, it tells a story about how white people see black people in South Africa. They see black people as something to mock, and they don't take black people seriously, and it's just all these performances that show that they don't take black people seriously.
Something to mock until a white person validates it.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. And just to speak on the UP issue as well, what for me shocked me the most is that these are young women. These are not, they were probably born post 94 at the least, or early, like in the 90s, you understand, when South Africa was a better place and where racial segregation was not institutionalized. So for young people like that who are in class at varsity with other young black women who probably have black lecturers who are women who teach them, who probably interact with black women in different roles within the university and in their lives, to see that the only image they have of a black woman is an exaggerated padded butt is problematic. So these other people that you see in your everyday life, do they not exist? Is it the only image that you see of blackness and black women, actually, in particular, that they have exaggerated butts? Is that, like, for me, that's problematic, that young people, and this speaks to then white supremacy again, that these things, people marinate in these perspectives in their mother's wombs, and they're brought up in this, and this is why you get, in 2004, young women patting their bums to act like they're white, act like they're black.
I also think in some ways it's also a class issue. The fact that, you know, these women, they dressed up as domestic workers. So now it's not just about race, it's about how you disrespect people because you think that they are of a lower class than you. And that's also another serious issue because it becomes a race issue in that the majority of our black population are in poverty. They are what we call the working class. So then, again, it's this disrespect that mounts out of a class issue as well as a race issue.
Yeah. Well, I, for one, hope we've seen the last of the butt headlines in South Africa, and perhaps more engagement on real issues.
Yeah, definitely.
I hope you had fun, and hopefully this is just the first of many hangouts that we'll have with our young reporters at the Daily Box, and I hope that you watching will join us again. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.